Right, so is the iPhone 16e really worth your hard-earned money? Does it live up to its ambition of giving people a value for money deal on the iPhone? Actually, on first glance, it seems like it might. This is no longer the really old-looking iPhone SEs which were low on price at $399 a pound or about 40,000 rupees, but still had Touch ID, they were much smaller, and anyone even glancing at it could tell you that you have a cheap iPhone. No, the iPhone 16e looks a lot more modern and like the latest iPhones. It even has a lot of the pro features from iPhone 16 like Apple Intelligence. But it's still cheaper. It's $200 a pound or 20,000 rupees cheaper than the regular 16. So this should be an easy recommendation for most people who want a great iPhone at a great price, right? Honestly, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but no, I can't recommend this iPhone to anyone. But I've actually found you an alternate iPhone to buy for the same $500 to $600 price point. You'll get all of the pro features from the latest iPhone, but this phone is only available for a while and might not last, so you're going to have to get one pretty quick. But before we talk about that, we first have to talk about why the iPhone 16e isn't good. In this video, I'm not just going to tell you the full list of technical specs and jargon about the iPhone 16e, like the fact that the processor has one less GPU core than the regular iPhone 16, but instead I'm going to try and talk to you about what truly matters for most people looking to buy this phone. So let's get into it. Here's the TLDR headline summary. The iPhone 16e was released in Feb 2025. It costs about $599 a pound or euros are about 60,000 rupees, making it about $200 a pound or euros or 20,000 rupees cheaper than the regular iPhone 16 and 460,000 cheaper than the Pro. Now it's got a full-size 6.1-inch display. Unlike the smaller iPhone SEs we used to get, this one is actually the same size as the flagship iPhone 16. It's got an aluminum body just like the iPhone 16 with an IP68 splash and water resistance rating, and it comes in just two colors, black and white, but there are a lot of fun colored cases if that's what you're into. Now the iPhone 16e is of course a long list of features and specs, but from all of these there are just 10 features that you need to know about. 4 of these are strengths, and these are really pro-level features that we've never seen before on the iPhone SEs in the past. And the other 6 are features which are basically compromises you're going to have to make versus the regular iPhone. Let's start with the strengths. These are first, the battery, which is superb and lasts the whole day with absolutely no problem. Second, Apple Intelligence, which is literally the latest big feature that Apple is using to try and sell its most expensive phones, and it's great to see that it's available on even the cheaper E series. The third strength is that it has the latest A18 chip that you get on the regular flagship iPhones, so the phone will feel super zippy and smooth to use, no compromises on power and speed here. And fourth is a weird one. It's a new Apple modem which is built into this phone, which may not be a strength you care about, but this is Apple putting their latest and best hardware not even in the flagships but into the cheaper iPhone. And the big advantage of this is probably that improved battery life that I talked about, and more on that in a sec. Now that you know the strength, let's talk about the compromises. Number 1 is the camera setup, where you just get one camera, the main lens, which has a smaller sensor compared to the regular iPhone 16. There's obviously no ultra wide or telephoto to zoom out or in. And on the video side, there's no cinematic mode and a reasonably shaky image stabilization on the go. Number 2, there's no Magsafe, which means slower wireless charging and that you can't use Magsafe accessories. Number 3 is the screen, which is a bit more laggy when you scroll because it has a 60Hz refresh rate versus the 120 you get on the flagship iPhones. And it's also not bright enough to be perfectly readable outdoors in bright sunlight. Number 4, there's no camera control button. Number 5, there's no dynamic island, which means no Uber updates and sports scores at the top of your phone. Instead, you get the older looking notch at the top. And number 6, you can't get precision tracking for Find Your AirPods or AirTags in case you lose them. Now, as you can see, some pretty big strengths with the latest chip and amazing battery and even Apple Intelligence. But the big question is, are the compromises ones that you're willing to make for the price, or are they deal breakers? Let's talk about them one by one. The biggest and most important feature for most people is always the camera, so let's start there. Let's first lay out the facts on the cameras for different iPhones. At the top end of Apple's offerings is the iPhone 16 Pro, which has 3 lenses, the main 48 megapixel, the 5x telephoto zoom lens, and then a 48 megapixel ultra wide, which helps you zoom out and take macro shots. Next is the iPhone 16, which has just 2 cameras, the same 48 megapixel main sensor, and then there's a 12 megapixel ultra wide. And then the iPhone 16e has just one camera, which is a 48 megapixel main lens. Now, the main lens on this iPhone 16e looks the same as the iPhone 16 when you compare the specs, Both say 48 megapixels, but the one on the 16E actually has a much smaller sensor, making it not that great in low light and not that great with moving subjects. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a good camera. The photos it takes are pretty good in the daytime, comparable very much to the iPhone 16, but without that depth of field, which means you don't get that nice, slightly blurry bokeh at the back of your images, which makes them look more refined. But then as you move into nighttime or indoors in lower light, the pictures get much softer and look kind of crunchy as the sensor isn't big enough to let in enough light. Now, remember, without the ultra-wide lens, you also lose the ability to zoom out of your shot, which is probably okay for most people because all you need to do is take a couple of steps back and use the same main lens. But the bigger problem is that means you lose macro photography, which means you can no longer go up super close to flowers or an insect or someone's face and take a shot. Now, I think these compromises on photos are okay. They're a bit on the edge of what would be acceptable for this price point. I think people can live without the macro and the ability to zoom out, but for a $600 phone, the main lens, it honestly needs to be at par with Android options and also the iPhone 15 around this price point, which this main lens doesn't seem to be. And wait, this is as far as photographs are concerned. There's also compromises on video. You don't get cinematic mode, which isn't just some pro feature. It's one of the most popular modes to shoot video with at parties and events, and it takes beautiful video which is able to change the depth of focus to move from one subject to another, just like in a movie. And also, when you shoot your video without that cinematic mode, you also don't get very good image stabilization. The regular iPhones have something called sensor shift image stabilization, which, as the words indicate, is when the sensor actually moves to stabilize your video. The iPhone 16e only has optical image stabilization that uses software and hence can lead to a bit of shaky video on the go. Now, I think that taking videos, especially on the move, is a very real, common, everyday use case for most people. And hence, if you put the photo and video together, I think that the camera is a big compromise. This camera setup might have been just about okay for the $400 price point at which Apple used to sell the SEs, but definitely not for a $600 phone. But is this the only big compromise? Well, number two, there's no Magsafe. The iPhone 16e doesn't have that circular row of magnets at the back that help you get faster wireless charging, help you attach wireless chargers to the right place, and also help you use Magsafe accessories like wallets and stands and stuff. The slower wireless charging speed of 7.5 watts on this phone versus the 15 watts that you get with Magsafe on the regular iPhone 16 is a compromise, but maybe not that big of a deal. It's not ideal, but you can just use wired charging. I mean, Apple's wireless charging has always been a bit slow to be really worth it. It takes way too long compared to the likes of OnePlus and Oppo, which charge at like 3 times the speed at like 50 watts. This has never been Apple's big competitive strength anyway. But no Magsafe does mean that even though this phone is rated only at 7.5 watts of charging, you may not even get that full 7.5 watts if you don't manage to line up the phone's charging coil exactly with the charger. So basically, if you buy this phone, just use a wire and don't even bother with wireless charging. Now, the other compromise with no Magsafe is that you can't use Magsafe accessories, which in itself is pretty significant, but it's not a deal breaker because it can be easily fixed. All you have to do is buy a Magsafe case, just like Android users do, which will then allow you to use accessories like snap-on wireless chargers and also help you get that full 7.5 watts of charging speed. But on a side note, this is one of the most irritating things that Apple didn't put on this phone. I mean, Magsafe came out like 4 years ago. It's been on every iPhone since. It was even on the iPhone 13 mini. It's just a bunch of circular magnets. Come on, Apple, case makers are helping people fix this, but they shouldn't have to. Nevertheless, in summary, I think the Magsafe thing is an inconvenience, but with the cases, not a deal breaker. But the third compromise, the screen on the iPhone 16e is it's 60 Hz and it looks good, but it's not that bright, which means when you take it outside, it's kind of okay visible at best in direct sunlight. And again, this stuff is not that big a problem at a $400 price point like the SEs used to have, but at $600, you're competing with some pretty high-end Android phones that can easily give you 120 Hz refresh and an awesome screen brightness. Fourth, there's no camera control button which they launched on the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro. There is an action button like last year, but not that new camera control button that debuted this year, which I think is not a compromise at all. It might just be a good thing. That button was generally considered to be quite hard to use, not very ergonomic to press, and most people just preferred using the controls on the screen. So this one I wouldn't worry too much about. Which is again the case for the fifth compromise, where you lose dynamic island, which means you can't see when your Uber's arriving or the latest sports score once you've closed the app at the top of the screen. Now look, the dynamic island is a nice feature, even if it is a bug that Apple somehow turned into a feature. Such an Apple thing to do. I mean, other phones have much smaller round circular cutouts for the camera that are super small, and they manage to hide all the other sensors in the bezel and the edges. But Apple hasn't bothered. They just gave this massive cutout at the top, which should actually make their phone look older technology compared to everyone else. But then they wrapped it in this dynamic island thing, which changes sizes and gives you all kinds of cool info, and now people have grown to love it. Apple, well played. But will you miss it if you don't have it? Not a lot. It's a small compromise, but not really a big one. And then sixth, you lose the ability to precisely track your AirPods and AirTags. This is because there's no ultra wideband on this phone. And again, this is something you can live without. But as you can see, we've been adding more and more to a growing pile of nice to have features that also make using an iPhone and iOS the joy that it is, that are individually okay to lose, but collectively starting to take away from the joy of using an iPhone. For example, if you use an iPhone, then very likely you'll have a pair of AirPods, and if they get lost, then the Find My feature for AirPods is actually pretty useful. AirTags are something that I use every day, my bags and keys, and all of this makes iPhone a really nice experience because it just works. Okay, so what do we have so far? The camera is decent, but not good enough for $600. The Magsafe is a big one, but you can get it back a bit with the cases. The screen is again a bit of a compromise for a $600 phone. And then dynamic island and precision airport finding and AirTags add to those small but meaningful compromise that you're starting to make. Now, just to be clear, there's a bunch of other stuff I actually haven't mentioned, but mostly because it isn't that relevant to everyday users. You don't get a Thread radio, which is used for Matter-based smart home devices, but I think that's okay because any of your smart home devices can act as a Thread radio. You don't get millimeter wave 5G, but not many people are on that standard, and normal 5G works just fine. You won't notice it at all, except maybe in a crowded concert where you're not getting signal. A slightly older version of portrait mode, but I don't think that's really noticeable. But on the plus side, the A18 chip has one less GPU core, which you're never going to notice unless you're a crazy gamer. And then there's Wi-Fi 6 instead of Wi-Fi 7, which you can live with. Okay, so now you know all the compromises, and it's quite a bit. And the next question is, are the strengths of this phone enough to make up for the compromises and justify the price? Let's recap the strengths. There's the great battery life. There's the fact that it has Apple Intelligence, which is of course the latest shiny feature that Apple keeps talking about. But unfortunately, it's not very good and not a compelling enough reason to upgrade to the iPhone 16, let alone the 16e. Third, it does have the latest A18 chip, even with one less GPU core, but it's still an amazing chip. It's going to be super fast and very zippy, and you're not going to complain about the speed on this phone. And fourth, there's that new modem, which you don't really care about except for the battery life. So now you know the compromises and the strengths. So should you actually buy this phone? It all comes down to the price, right? Now, there's a lot of debate on the internet on the seemingly high price of this phone, and many have explained that it's due to the tariffs and the cost of the components, like the higher RAM you need for the Apple Intelligence and the fact that it's a premium design compared to the earlier SEs. I have a different take. None of this matters. The only thing that matters is what else you could get at this price point. What would you miss out on if you bought this phone, which in economics you would call the opportunity cost of this purchase? So let's look around and look at the other $600-ish price point phones that you could buy instead. And there are a few very interesting options. As far as iPhones go, there's the iPhone 15, which is $100 or pounds more at about $700. And in terms of new phones, there's not much else. But if you're okay with a refurbished phone, which I think you should be, you can actually get a refurbished iPhone 15 Pro for a very similar budget. At the time of making this video, you could get one in the US for about $650, in the UK for about £650, and even in India for about 70 to 80,000 rupees. That phone will knock the iPhone 16e out of the water. And by the way, if you're open to looking outside the Apple family, you can actually get a refurbished Samsung S24 Ultra for around $600. That's insane. Both of these are some serious options I highly recommend you consider. The iPhone 15 Pro is an offering in a completely different league. It has a fully Pro 3-camera setup, Magsafe, dynamic island, an amazing screen with 120Hz refresh rate, and so on, and it still gives you Apple Intelligence as a feature. It's a Pro phone at a budget price. Similarly, the S24 Ultra is not just a better option, it was awarded the best smartphone in the world across almost all reviews for the last year. Now, both of these phones are a steal. It means you're spending about $600 to get $1,200+ phones. I'd really recommend that you get one of these two phones instead of the 16e. But if you still don't want a refurbished phone and you must have a new iPhone at the Apple Store, then I'd still ask you to reconsider and actually spend the extra $100 to get an iPhone 15, which Apple still sells officially. You get a significantly better camera with an ultra-wide lens, better video which has proper stabilization and cinematic mode, Magsafe, dynamic island, ultra wideband for that precision AirPods tracking, and you get Magsafe wireless charging at 15 watts. The only thing you don't get versus the 16e is Apple Intelligence. And given that Apple Intelligence hasn't been very useful just yet, it might actually be worth it to give that up and get back every other single compromise you're making on the 16e. Now that's a value deal. Whichever of these three options you choose, I think they're all great value deals versus the iPhone 16e. So, would you buy this phone? Let me know what you think in the comments. And before you click away, if you did like this video, do help motivate a small creator like me to make more of these videos by subscribing and leaving some love in the comments. It seems pretty small, but it really makes my day and keeps me going. See you soon.